road, got a place called Bruce with a girl named Leslie. Well, came walked a man with a gun in his hand, and he was looking for you. I said, hey, that fella was a heck of a devil. What you trying to do?
Okay, here it is, transmission daytime. So, well, I call it transmission, but we're just putting a new clutch in. I'm not going to put the other engine or trans in it yet, so I'm just going to pull the transits out. It's in there right now, switch out the clutch, put it back together, so I hope to get it done in a day. I don't think it'll take me too much longer, although I am putting the garden in today too, so we'll see. Might be a little bit tough. Yep, so I'll read up on the book quick and see what that says to see if there's anything really weird. So that's the way I started when I got my first car, was working on it, and then I crashed that. Then I got one that was a manual that needed transmission work, well, clutch, we thought. So that's how I really learned. I mean, you can kind of know the concepts of how it's going to work on a car to do it, but for the specifics of that car, it definitely helps to read up on the book or get the book and see what the steps are. Even mechanics, they use what's called all data. They look it up and it'll tell them exactly the procedure to get it done and how long it should take them to. So something like this, changing a clutch out on a car, is probably a couple $1,000s. Yeah, so we'll see how much we have to do. I'll probably have to take off everything as far as the left front's concerned, because it's engine and then transmission on this side. So to get to everything on there to pull it out, I'll have to probably take out everything on the left hand side of the car. Suspension, steering, all that. The right hand side, I might be able to get away with just taking the CV axle out, but I'll show you guys more of that as I get going. I might just end up by doing a time lapse of me doing the work and then only stopping and doing things where I think it's kind of important for you guys to know, or maybe just when it comes to the actual clutch disassembly and assembly. So, alright, stick with it. Alright, I'm going to narrate what I'm doing here. So first things first, disconnecting the battery terminals. So usually these are just 2 bolts that hold down the top. You loosen them up and they just got 2 little hooks on them that go beyond by the side of the battery. Then you pull the battery out. So battery's out of the way. Alright, now I'm going to start looking at probably bell housing bolts here. Oh no, the starter. So my next step is the starter. Usually 2 or 3 bolts that hold these in too. This one's nice because the starter's right at the top of the engine. So pull these 2 out, and then there'll usually be 2 electrical connections, maybe 3 depending on the model of your car. So mine just have the 2 connections. One is a hot wire that runs back to the battery, and the other one is the ignition. So the one is like the one that runs the ignition. So it's a solenoid, so it takes a small current from your switch, from your key and your ignition switch, or in my case a push button, and that triggers a solenoid, basically like a big magnet that moves back and forth, and it closes the contacts from the battery to the starter where it's a real thick, heavy cable. So kind of a pain in the butt to get in there. The starter was making a little bit of noise too, so I took a look at the gears when I pulled it out. So tons of extensions during this job, so I used all sorts of 3/8 extensions, 1/2-inch extensions, a whole lot of stuff, because basically you're taking the car apart, and now just trying to wiggle that thing out of the way. So Not quite sure what's going on here. I had a pry bar, which... Oh, I think I was bending a bracket out of the way so I could get in there better. Oh, and I guess this did have 2 bolts that held it to the bell housing, and then it had 2 bolts that held the back support. And then on that bracket, there was 2 other bolts that held that in. I think that bracket was also attached to the clutch cable. So I also started working on, I think, the bell housing bolts right here, or the clutch assembly. So there's a clutch cable that comes from inside the car. Basically, looks very similar to your brake pedal on a lever, and then that cable moves forward and then moves another lever, which is like a clutch fork. And actually, it pulls the cable back towards the driver, and then turns the fork. There, the starter's out. Took a look at it. Everything looked fine. It looked like a fairly new remanufactured starter. And now, after I'm complete with the job, I noticed that I don't get that sound where it sounded like the starter was missing teeth. So I don't know that they had it mounted correctly, or maybe it was even just a little bit loose when they put it in. So now I've got that out of the way, and I'm just start removing some of the brackets that are in my way. So the bracket holding the clutch fork assembly on, the bracket holding the clutch cable, and then there really wasn't too much else in the way. I had to move some brake lines. Didn't really have to undo any electrical connectors. I think 1 or 2 maybe. I keep that nice little red tray there, you see. I like to use that when I get going, or as I start pulling parts off it, and kind of keep certain parts together. I didn't really stick with it the whole job, because after I got going, I was like, oh, this isn't going to take me very long at all. All said and done, I don't know, maybe a couple hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours worth of total work. Alright, yeah, removing top bell housing bolts. Also, some of the stuff I took off before was like the speedometer cable you didn't see. So there's 1 bolt that holds that in. The speedometer cable is just run off an actual cable that spins. And that cable seats down in this pocket, actually where you fill the transmission fluid in here. And then it's hooked up to a nylon gear. So it's 2 nylon gears that mesh together. And usually those things are prone to wearing out, but these look like they're in good condition. And the nylon, you really don't have to worry about, because if that gets into the gears, it's a soft material. It doesn't really hurt anything. The bell housing bolts out. Well, this is called the bell housing, and then in here is the transmission, and in this case they call it a transaxle because the transmission goes straight to the axles. So they call it a transaxle because there's a differential in with the transmission. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 the bolts out. Now I'll have to probably go pull CV axle. I'll have to pull, this is speedometer, and looks like a grounding strap, which I don't think was there. It's nice having this other transmission around so I can look and see. And then I'll have to drop the fluid out of it too. 1, 2, 3. Well, there's not much that holds it in. So, if everything keeps going smoothly, I'll be able to get it done in 1 day and put it in the garden, which would be awesome. Okay. Yeah, so the next thing I'll do is pop out the CV axle, which in that case, I'm doing all that work. So to get the CV axle out, I'll have to take out the axle nut, and then the lower ball joint and the sway brace, so I can swing this out. Sometimes it's steering too, so we'll see Yeah, we'll do lower control arm, ball joint, and then this will pull out. The axle will stay in place, and then I'll have to pry it out. This is actually exactly how I chopped my finger up last year, if you guys remember that. Alright, back to it. Oh, axle nuts too. Sometimes they're secured with a cotter pin, sometimes they have this. It's a little detent that you just hit it with a punch when you're done, and they get it out. You're not supposed to reuse them, but I am cheap. That's the reason most of the time why I do stuff. If there was a customer paying for this, I would. Sure. You have to. I mean, you can't really say like, you can save me a little bit of money if we don't replace that axle nut. Well, that's not good. Also, why I'll be a little bit careful with it, so I don't have to replace it. Take an actual round punch. So I'll take a center punch and go right in the groove. Good to go. That'd be good. And I just put this all together so it won't be too bad. So I'll explain when we go to put this all back together that this axle nut actually is what holds that bearing in place and puts what they call preload on it. So what that does is you don't want to have your bearing too tight or too loose, because you'll end up by wearing it out prematurely either way. Too tight's bad, it'll get too hot. Too loose, allow dirt to get in there. Jeez. Lower control arm. And I'll have to do this both sides to get the axle out. So sometimes you get the ball joint out. You have to support the disc, or compress, I should say, the suspension. Try using the safest way to do this, but it works. As long as you're not jacking up the whole car, which... Oh, yeah. I might have to loosen up this sway bar so it'll bend. Okay. So I popped the ball joint loose. See if I can show it to you. Right there. Well, let me let this down and you'll be able to see it. So that actually popped out on me not that long. There, that's the ball joint. Probably would help if I lubed it, but this is fairly new too. So I mean, all this stuff is less than 6 months old. Now I can push my axle back in. This is the only bad part is I'll probably have to go back in and repack all my bearings. It's not the end of the world though. Now this is where I smashed my finger, so I'll try and record this, but it's so tight in there that... So what I'm going to do is get behind that with a pry bar or two and pop this CV shaft out. The only thing that holds it in are just these two little spring clips, so I'll show you that axle part.